The hum of the gas station lights buzzed against the silence of the late night, the faint scent of gasoline and fried food clinging to the cool air. Ethan Walker, once a proud Marine Force recon sniper, now just another forgotten man, stood in front of the coffee machine inside the dingy convenience store, counting his last few quarters. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of combat, from days spent crawling through the dirt, from nights gripping a rifle in hostile territory. Now, they trembled slightly as he sorted through the change. He didn't need much, just a cup of coffee, something warm, something to remind him that he was still human. Behind him, the glass door swung open, the chime ringing through the empty store. Ethan didn't turn. He recognized the sound of their boots before he even saw them. Sergeant Travis and Officer Barnes, local law enforcement, the type that never actually fought a battle but walked around as if they had won one. Ethan had crossed paths with them before, but he never engaged. It was easier to let them have their fun, to let them look down on him like he was nothing. But tonight felt different. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their sneers before they even spoke. "Well, if it isn't our town's favorite war hero," Travis said, his voice thick with mockery. "Still playing Soldier Walker? Or just playing homeless now?" Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. Inhale, exhale, ignore them. "Hello, Mr. Pictures here, and before we continue with the story, please subscribe to the channel as it would allow me to continue with these stories. Thank you. Now back to the story." Barnes chuckled, stepping closer, his uniform crisp, untouched by real struggle. "Hell, I heard he used to be some big shot sniper. Now look at him, begging for change in a damn gas station." Ethan didn't flinch. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. He poured his coffee, slow and steady, as if they weren't even there. But Travis wasn't done. He stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a deliberate move, an attempt to assert dominance. "Come on, Walker," he said, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Ain't there some vet program or whatever for guys like you? I mean, you risked your life for this country, right?" He let out a low laugh. "And look what it gave you in return." Ethan felt his grip tighten around the cup. The heat of the coffee barely registered against the boiling rage building in his chest. He had spent years training to keep his composure under pressure. He had been through ambushes, firefights, hell on earth, and still, he hadn't broken. But something about the way Travis laughed, the way Barnes smirked, the casual cruelty in their voices was worse than the battlefield. They didn't see him as a threat. They saw him as nothing. He set his coffee down, turning slowly, and met Travis's gaze head on. His blue eyes were steady, unreadable. "You think this is funny?" Ethan asked, his voice low, controlled. Barnes scoffed. "What's funny is how guys like you expect us to respect you just because you wore a uniform once." Ethan let out a slow breath. They didn't know who they were talking to. Travis smirked. "What, you gonna cry about it? Or are you gonna salute me like a good little soldier?" Ethan could have walked away. He could have let it slide, just like he had 100 times before. But tonight, he was done being silent. He stepped forward, closing the space between them in an instant. Travis, who had been so sure of himself a second ago, tensed. He wasn't used to someone standing up to him. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't shove, didn't threaten, didn't curse. He just said the truth. "You ever spend 3 days pinned down by sniper fire while your best friend bleeds out next to you?" Travis blinked. Barnes shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's voice didn't waver. It was steady, cold, lethal. "You ever have to make the call to leave a man behind because it was him or the whole damn unit?" No one spoke. Ethan took another step forward, his presence alone suffocating. "I don't need your respect. I don't need your pity. But you will not..." His voice darkened, his eyes locking onto Travis like a predator watching prey. "Talk to me like I'm less of a man than you." The store was silent. Barnes swallowed. "Jesus, man, we were just messing around." Travis didn't move, his confidence cracked like glass. Then, from the corner of the store, a voice cut through the silence. "I got that all on video." All three of them turned. A young man stood near the shelves, phone raised, camera still recording. Ethan didn't even remember when the kid had walked in, but now it didn't matter. Because the world had just witnessed everything. Travis's face went pale. Barnes cursed under his breath. Ethan? He just picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and walked out of the store like nothing had happened. But everything had. Because by the time the sun came up the next morning, that video would have already changed everything. By sunrise, everything had changed. The video spread like wildfire. What started as a clip shared by a handful of locals exploded into a national conversation overnight. It was everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, news stations. Ethan Walker, the Marine veteran humiliated by 2 police officers, had suddenly become the face of something bigger. At first, he didn't even know. He woke up in the front seat of his rusted-out truck, parked behind the auto shop, where he picked up side work when the owner let him. His back ached, his muscles stiff from another night, curled in a position that no human body was designed to tolerate. He rubbed his face, groggy, ready for another long, forgettable day. Then he turned his phone on. It took a second for the messages to load, hundreds, then thousands, rolling in faster than he could process. Texts from numbers he didn't recognize. Missed calls. A voicemail from an unknown number that started with, "Mr. Walker, my name is James Carter from Channel 5 News." His gut tightened. What the hell was going on? Then, his phone vibrated again. A text from the only person he still talked to somewhat regularly. "Logan Myers. Call me." Now, Ethan frowned, swiping through his notifications. His thumb hovered over a news link, and when he clicked it, his own face stared back at him. Viral video, police mock, homeless veteran. His response stuns the internet. His stomach dropped. He opened the video, the same one he hadn't even known was recorded, and watched himself standing there in the gas station, locking eyes with Sergeant Travis, every word crisp and clear. You ever spend 3 days pinned down by sniper fire while your best friend bleeds out next to you? You ever have to make the call to leave a man behind because it was him or the whole damn unit? The clip ended with the stunned silence, the young man's voice cutting in. "I got that all on video." Ethan exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ. He barely had time to process before his phone rang again, Logan's name flashing across the screen. He answered. "Tell me what the hell is happening!" "You don't know?" Logan's voice was sharp, urgent. "Ethan, you're everywhere. News stations are covering it. Veteran groups are reposting it. Hell, I've had 2 different organizations reach out to me trying to get in contact with you." Ethan rubbed his temples. "I didn't ask for this." "Well, you got it," Logan said, "and it's not going away." Ethan stayed silent, gripping the phone tighter. "Listen," Logan continued, "people want to help. They're offering jobs, housing, legal action against the department. The city's getting torn apart for what happened to you." Ethan's jaw clenched. Help. That word always felt like a double-edged sword. People meant well, but help had always come with strings. It came in the form of pity, of people treating him like some broken thing to be fixed. He wasn't interested in being some charity case, some story that made people feel good about themselves for saving him. And yet, this wasn't just about him anymore. He had read the comments, veterans sharing their own stories, people coming forward about how they had been ignored, how they had been discarded by the country they swore to protect. This wasn't just one man's fight. He exhaled through his nose. "What do I do?" Logan was quiet for a beat. "You've got 2 choices. Ignore it, let it fade, and go back to your life. Or..." Ethan stared out the windshield, watching the city wake up around him. "Or," Logan continued, "you can make them listen." Silence stretched between them. Ethan had spent years being ignored, years wasting away in the background while the world moved on, pretending like he and others like him didn't exist. And now, suddenly, they were listening. He had fought for a lot of things in his life. Maybe it was time he fought for himself. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Set up a meeting." Logan didn't miss a beat. "Already did. I'll send you the details." The call ended. Ethan set his phone down, staring out at the morning sky, feeling the weight of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. 3 days later, he stood in front of a packed town hall meeting, cameras flashing, news anchors adjusting their microphones, the audience buzzing with energy. He had been given a platform, a place to speak, not just for himself, but for every veteran who had been left behind. The mayor had tried to smooth things over, but the public outrage was too big to contain. The city was on fire, and Ethan was standing right in the center of it. He stepped up to the podium, gripping the edges, scanning the room, His voice didn't shake. His posture didn't falter. "My name is Ethan Walker." He let the silence settle. "I served as a force recon sniper in the United States Marine Corps for 10 years. I fought for my country, for my brothers, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves." He swallowed. "And when I came home, this country forgot about me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I'm not the only one," he continued. "I've slept on park benches. I've watched other veterans struggle just to get through the day, while the rest of the world walked past them like they were invisible." He locked eyes with the police chief sitting stiffly at the front row. "I was ignored, belittled, mocked by men who will never know what it means to put their life on the line." The air in the room was thick with tension. "This isn't just about me. This is about every veteran who has been cast aside. Every soldier who was told they were a hero when they were deployed, but treated like a burden when they came home." He leaned forward slightly. "I will not be silent, not anymore." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, reporters scrambling for their cameras, capturing the moment as if they knew. This was history being made. Ethan stood firm, unmoved by the noise, by the flashes, by the sudden weight of being seen again. He didn't need fame. He didn't need pity. He needed change. And now, for the first time in years, he had the power to demand it. The town hall meeting had ended hours ago, but the shockwaves were just beginning. Ethan Walker sat alone on a bench outside the building, his hands clasped between his knees, his head lowered as he took a slow, steady breath. The noise was still ringing in his ears, the applause, the shouting, the roar of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. He had thought standing up there, saying those words, would be the hardest part. He was wrong, because now he had to decide what came next. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It had been ringing all day. News stations wanting an interview, veteran organizations offering support, strangers thanking him for saying what they had been too afraid to say for years. The entire country had seen him now. The whole damn world knew his name again. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. He had wanted to be seen, to be heard. But this was something else entirely. He wasn't just a guy in a gas station anymore. He was a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. "You gonna sit here all night, or are you planning on answering one of those calls?" The familiar voice made him glance up. Logan Myers stood in front of him, arms crossed, watching him with the same unreadable expression he'd always had. Ethan shook his head, leaning back against the bench. "I didn't ask for any of this." Logan snorted. "You didn't have to. The world asked for it." Ethan didn't respond. He knew Logan was right, but that didn't mean he had to like it. Logan sighed, stepping forward. "Look, I get it. You don't want to be some internet sensation. You don't want the attention. But it's already happening. You can either walk away, let someone else control the narrative, or you can own this." Ethan clenched his jaw. He hated this part. The expectation. The weight of it. "You're a leader, Walker," Logan continued. "You always have been. Whether you like it or not, people are looking at you now, waiting to see what you'll do next." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And if I don't want to be anyone's leader?" Logan didn't flinch. "Then you waste the best damn opportunity you've ever had to make a real difference." The words hit hard, too hard, because deep down, Ethan knew Logan was right. This wasn't just about him anymore. The same people who had ignored him, who had stepped over men like him, who had never once cared about what happened to veterans after they came home. They were paying attention now. And he had a choice. Walk away, let things fade, let the world forget again. Or fight, for the ones who couldn't, for the ones who had already lost too much. His phone buzzed again, another call, another unknown number. This time, he answered. "Mr. Walker," a woman's voice said, professional but warm. "My name is Sarah Dawson. I work with Valor Initiative, a nonprofit that provides housing and job placement for struggling veterans. We've seen your speech. We want to help." Ethan pressed his fingers against his temple. "I'm not looking for handouts." "We're not offering a handout," she said. "We're offering a partnership." That made him pause. "You've already done more for the veteran community in 3 days than most politicians have done in years," Sarah continued. "You're the voice they've been waiting for. If you're willing to fight, we want to fight with you." The weight of her words settled over him. This was real. This was his shot. He glanced at Logan, who raised an eyebrow, waiting. Ethan closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, then let it out slow. "I'm listening." The next few weeks were a blur of movement. Ethan met with veteran organizations, city officials, business owners willing to invest in change. What started as one viral video turned into a full-blown movement. The public demanded accountability. Sergeant Travis and Officer Barnes were placed on administrative leave, the department scrambling to handle the PR nightmare. The mayor, who had initially brushed off Ethan's story, was now publicly pledging new programs for homeless veterans. And Ethan? He was on the front lines again, but this time, the battlefield wasn't some foreign country. It was here, the city, the system. The fight to make sure that what happened to him never happened to another veteran again. At first, he wasn't sure he could do it. He had spent so many years fighting for himself, alone, that the idea of fighting for something bigger felt unnatural. But then he started meeting them. The veterans who showed up to his meetings, who shook his hand with tears in their eyes, who told him, "I thought nobody gave a damn about us anymore, until you stood up." The small business owners who reached out, offering jobs to veterans looking for work. The local construction companies who pledged to help build housing for struggling former soldiers. The people who weren't just talking, but doing. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something shift. He wasn't alone anymore. One evening after a long day of meetings, Ethan found himself back at the gas station. The same one where everything started. Except this time, he wasn't counting quarters for a cup of coffee. He walked inside, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped up to the counter. Behind him, the door swung open. He didn't have to turn to know who it was. Sergeant Travis. The officer froze when he saw Ethan standing there, his hand hovering just above his belt. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his stance, no mockery in his eyes, just shame. Ethan looked at him, expression unreadable. He could say something, he could gloat, could remind Travis of who he had tried to humiliate. But he didn't. Instead, he paid for his water, gave the cashier a small nod, and walked past Travis without a single word, because he had already won. And there was a hell of a lot more work to do. Ethan Walker stood at the edge of the crowd, his hands resting in his jacket pockets, watching as the city finally woke up to the problem they had ignored for years. What had started as one man's stand against humiliation had grown into something unstoppable. The town square was packed, filled with people from all walks of life: veterans, business owners, students, activists, families. Some held signs with messages of support for struggling soldiers. Others chanted for police reform. And some just stood, watching, witnessing history being made in real time. A year ago, Ethan had been invisible, just another forgotten name in a system that chewed men up and spit them out when they weren't useful anymore. Not anymore. The stage was set in the center of the square, a podium standing in front of a banner that read, "No Veteran Left Behind." The rally had been organized by Valor Initiative, the organization that had reached out to him weeks ago, the first of many changes that had come from his stand. Logan stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the restless crowd. "Hell of a turnout," he muttered. Ethan exhaled, glancing at the sheer number of people who had shown up. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Didn't think it'd be this big." Logan chuckled. "That's because you still don't realize how much you matter." Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't used to this, being important, being heard. He wasn't a politician, he wasn't an activist. He was just a man who had refused to stay silent one last time, and somehow it had sparked something bigger than himself. A woman in a blazer, Sarah Dawson, the director of Valor Initiative, approached him with a microphone in her hand. "You ready?" she asked, studying him carefully. No, he wasn't. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't used to standing in front of crowds like this. But he had been given a chance, a platform, and there were too many people who had gone unheard for too long. So instead of answering, he stepped forward, taking the microphone, walking to the podium as the chants and murmurs slowly died down. He let the silence settle. He had learned long ago that silence wasn't weakness. It was control. "My name is Ethan Walker," he said, his voice steady, "and I am a United States Marine." The crowd erupted into applause, but he lifted a hand, signaling them to quiet down. "I came home from war expecting a country that still cared about me, that still cared about my brothers who fought beside me. But that's not what I found. His gaze swept over the crowd. I found indifference. I found red tape. I found a system that calls us heroes when we serve, but statistics when we struggle. The murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. For years, I thought that was just how things were. I thought being ignored was just something I had to accept. He let out a slow breath. But then 2 men in uniform laughed at me, mocked me, called me a failure because I wasn't standing in a place they deemed worthy of my past. He clenched the microphone, his anger still simmering, but he controlled it. They thought I was weak. They thought I was nothing. He let the words hang. They were wrong. The crowd roared, the energy electrifying. Ethan let the noise settle before continuing. This isn't just about me. This is about every veteran who has been ignored, abandoned, cast aside like we don't matter once we stop wearing the uniform. This is about the 22 veterans a day who take their own lives because they don't see another way out. This is about the thousands of men and women sleeping in their cars, in shelters, in the streets, because our country calls them heroes, but refuses to give them a way to survive. His chest tightened, but he didn't stop. This country can do better. We must do better, and that starts now. More cheers, louder than before. Thanks to the pressure from all of you, the city has announced a new veteran housing initiative. Business owners have stepped up to offer jobs to former service members. We have mental health resources opening doors for soldiers who need support, not silence. The applause grew thunderous, but he wasn't finished. And to those of you who laughed at me, who mocked me, who thought that I was too broken to fight back. He lifted his chin, his voice iron strong. You were wrong. The roar of approval that followed shook the ground. As he stepped away from the podium, people surged forward, veterans shaking his hand, mothers of fallen soldiers hugging him, young men and women thanking him for speaking out. For the first time in years, he felt whole again. He had spent so long thinking his purpose was lost that he had faded into the background of a world that didn't care about him. But now, standing in the center of a movement he had never expected to lead, he realized something. He had just won a different kind of war, and this time, he wasn't fighting alone. 1 year later, Ethan stood in front of a brand new building, freshly painted. The words Walker Veteran Resource Center bold across the front. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a safe haven for veterans in crisis. A place where men and women who had given everything wouldn't be left with nothing. It was proof that change was possible. He glanced at Logan, who smirked. Not bad for a guy who didn't want to be in the spotlight. Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. Not bad at all. He stepped forward, raising the ceremonial scissors. The crowd, filled with veterans, volunteers, and officials, watched in anticipation. And with one swift motion, he cut the ribbon, opening the doors to something that would last long after his name faded from the headlines. Because this wasn't about fame. This wasn't about revenge. This was about making sure that no soldier was left behind, ever again. And that was a mission worth fighting for.